Last summer I found myself the unexpected inheritor of an enigmatic camera shop, nestled on a narrow cobbled street in Charleston's historic district. This place had been a family heirloom since the 1940s. However, it had fallen into disrepair, its paint peeling, sign creaking, and dust settling on the antique cameras that lined the shelves. My uncle, a man with a penchant for forgotten things, left it to me, perhaps seeing a kindred spirit in my love for the mysterious. Or maybe it was just because everyone else in the family considered the shop a curse rather than a gift. The first day I entered the shop as its owner, the air smelled of old leather and metal. It felt like stepping into a time capsule. Among the high shelves filled with cameras from every era were stacks of old photographs and negatives scattered around like leaves in fall. While I was sifting through these stacks on the third day, I found the first of the odd photos. It was a black and white image, quite ordinary at first glance. A family picnic from the 1950s, judging by the clothing. But as I looked closer, I noticed something off about one of the figures. Behind the smiling family, partly obscured by a tree, was another figure, a man staring directly at the camera with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His eyes seemed to follow me. Days turned into weeks as I delved deeper into the old stock, organizing and sifting through the forgotten memories. And then, I stumbled upon them, the odd photos. Each one was a chilling reminder of a figure that seemed to haunt the edges of the frame. He was always in the background, always staring with those piercing eyes, and always, inexplicably, no one else in the photo seemed aware of his presence. Curiosity turned into an all-consuming obsession. I couldn't sleep, eat, or think of anything else but the photos, and the man in them. I researched the photos for a connection or pattern explaining the man's recurring appearances. My only clue was a faded receipt for photo development, dated back in 1954, signed by a Mr. Dorian Graves. The more I delved into this mystery, the more it consumed me. Things escalated the night I decided to stay late to delve deeper into the shop's old record books. It was midnight when I heard the faint, unmistakable sound of a camera shutter coming from the back of the shop. A single desk lamp dimly lighted the room, and the rest of the shop lurked in the darkness. My heart raced as I stood up, the old wooden floor creaking under my feet. I walked towards the sound, my hands trembling, each step echoing in the silent shop. When I reached the back room, the air felt colder and denser, as if charged with static. On the old oak counter was one of the antique cameras, a 1940s Rolleiflex, positioned as if it had just been used. The sight sent a shiver down my spine as if the camera itself was watching me. As I approached, I noticed a new photo had been ejected from the camera, slowly developing in the dim light. It was a photo of the shop interior taken from the counter, and there, in the background, visible in the doorway to the front of the shop, was the figure of Mr. Dorian Graves looking straight into the lens. My fingers trembled as they brushed against the still damp surface of the developing photo. Mr. Dorian Graves' figure seemed to come alive, his eyes piercing through the room's darkness. The air grew thicker and a chill ran down my spine. Just as I was about to touch the photo, the door to the shop creaked open, shattering the silence and sending a wave of fear through me. Startled, I spun around to see who it was. Standing in the doorway was Elsie, a neighborhood cafe owner who often brought me coffee during my late nights. Tonight was no different, but the timing of her arrival couldn't have been more unnerving.
"Everything all right, hun?"
Elsie asked, stepping into the dimly lit shop. She placed the coffee on a cluttered part of the counter, her eyes scanning the chaotic setup of photographs and old cameras. I smiled weakly. "Yeah, just got caught up with some old stock." She glanced at the photo on the counter, then back at me.
"Working late on these old relics? You ever find anything interesting in them?"
"You could say that," I replied, my eyes flicking back to the photo of Mr. Graves. I debated whether to share the story of the recurring figure in the photographs, but something held me back. Instead, I asked, "Elsie, have you ever heard of a Dorian Graves around here?" Elsie furrowed her brows, thinking.
"Doesn't ring a bell, and I thought I knew all the old ghosts and their stories in this part of town. Why do you ask?"
"Just something that came up in the old records," I lied partially. I didn't feel ready to share the eerie details, but I have not yet.
"Well, if he's anything like the rest of the shadows lurking around these old streets, he's probably got a story worth hearing."
Elsie chuckled, oblivious to the weight of her words. I nodded, the wheels in my mind turning. "Elsie, would you mind keeping me company for a bit tonight? I feel it's not a good idea to be alone here right now."
"Of course, hun. Let's sort through some of these ghosts together.
Elsie pulled up a chair with a friendly grin. I began showing Elsie the photos featuring Mr. Graves as we sat together. With each image, her smile faded, replaced by a look of concern.
This isn't normal, is it?
No, it's not, and it gets stranger, I admitted, then explained about the photo that appeared tonight. Elsie listened intently, her usual skepticism shadowed by the undeniable oddity of the situation. Suddenly, another click of a camera shutter echoed through the shop. We both froze. Slowly, I turned towards the sound, Elsie right behind me. On the same old counter, another camera, an old Nikon this time, had activated itself. Approaching cautiously, I watched another photo slide out, developing in front of our eyes. It was a photo of us, taken from the back of the shop, and there, in the background, the figure of Mr. Dorian Graves was closer, his features more defined, a sinister smile playing on his lips.
Okay, that does it. Who is he and what does he want?
I don't know, but I think it's about time we find out, I said, determination settling over my fear. Together, we began to plan how to delve deeper into the mystery of Dorian Graves, unaware that the night had more secrets to reveal. We spent the next few hours poring over the shop's old ledgers and photo albums, looking for any mention of Dorian Graves. Our search was interrupted by intermittent clicks from various cameras around the shop, each producing a new photo with Graves lurking in the shadows. The increasing frequency of these occurrences did nothing to ease our growing tension. Around 3 a.m., Elsie found something.
Look at this,
she whispered, handing me a dusty, leather-bound journal hidden under a pile of old camera manuals. The journal was thick with age, the pages yellowed, but the writing was meticulous. The entries were dated back to the 1950s and signed by my uncle. As I flipped through the pages, a particular entry caught my eye. June 12, 1955. Dorian Graves returned today. He insists on reviewing the photos before anyone else. I don't know what he searches for in those pictures or why he is so drawn to them, but there's a darkness to him that chills my spine. He's no ordinary man. If he is, he's touched by something otherworldly. I must find out more, for I fear this might lead to something dire.
Your uncle knew him.
It seems so, I replied, my mind racing, and it sounds like he feared whatever Graves was after. Deciding we needed more answers, we agreed to visit the local library the following day to see if we could uncover anything else about Graves or any unusual events from the 1950s that might connect to these photographs. Morning couldn't come soon enough, and as dawn broke, Elsie and I made our way to the library. The librarian, an old friend of my uncle's named Marjorie, was more than willing to help when we explained our predicament. She led us to old newspaper archives, where we spent the morning scanning through microfilm. Finally, we found a small article dated June 15, 1955, just a few days after the journal entry. It read, "Local man missing. Dorian Graves, a noted historian and collector of rare photographs, has been reported missing under mysterious circumstances. His last known whereabouts were linked to several local businesses, including a camera shop." Chills ran down my spine as I read the article. He vanished just days after my uncle wrote about him feeling dangerous.
And now he's appearing in your photos.
Marjorie's curiosity piqued. We returned to the shop with more questions than answers, but a new resolve to dig deeper into its history and mysterious visitor. As we entered, the atmosphere felt charged, as if the shop was aware of our probing and did not approve. As we were sorting through more boxes that evening, another camera clicked. We rushed to it, apprehensive about what we might find. The photo developed slowly, revealing a scene from the shop in the 1950s, bustling with customers. And there in the crowd was my young and vibrant uncle talking to a man who could only be Dorian Graves. "Elsie, look," I pointed at the photo. Then at another journal entry I remembered. My uncle wrote that Graves was obsessed with a particular photo. If we can find that, maybe we can figure out why he's tied to this place. We turned the shop upside down, looking for that specific photo. Hours slipped by, and just as we were about to give up, Elsie found a hidden compartment in the back of an old wooden drawer. Inside was a single photograph, unlike the others. It was a picture of the shop taken from the street. But there, reflected in the shop window, was an image not of the street but of a dark, foreboding forest that certainly did not belong in urban Charleston.
This has to be it.
As we stared at the photograph, a plan began to form. If Graves was looking for this, it must be the key to his disappearance and haunting presence. Holding the peculiar photograph in our hands, Elsie and I decided our next step was to try to understand the significance of the dark forest reflected in the glass. The image was eerie, with dense, shadowy trees that seemed to whisper secrets. I flipped through my uncle's journal again, hoping for a clue. Suddenly, an entry caught my eye. September 7th, 1955. I've discovered something extraordinary about the photograph Graves was obsessed with. It is a window to another place, not merely a reflection. I dared to touch it under the full moon, and my hand, it went through. I pulled back in fear, but now I know this is more than a photo. I must explore this further, but with great caution. Elsie, listen to this, I said, my voice trembling as I read the entry aloud. Her eyes widened with both fascination and fear.
We need to see if it's true. We need to test the photo like your uncle did.
It was decided. We would wait until the full moon, just 2 nights away. Until then, we prepared ourselves by reading more about mystical portals and other dimensions in folklore and paranormal research. We even contacted a local expert in supernatural phenomena, Dr. Helena Marks, who agreed to join us on the test night. The night of the full moon arrived, shrouded in a thin mist that seemed almost preternatural. Dr. Marks met us at the shop, bringing equipment to monitor environmental changes. We set up the photograph in the same position it was found, near the back of the shop under the faint glow of the moonlight filtering through the window.
Are you sure you want to go through with this?
Dr. Marks asked, her voice serious, her eyes scanning the eerie photograph. We need answers, I replied, feeling a resolve that surprised even me. Elsie nodded in agreement, her hands clasped tightly. We each took turns touching the photograph, at first with hesitance, then with more confidence. At my touch, the surface of the photo rippled like water disturbed by a fallen leaf. I pushed forward, my fingertips meeting cold, damp air, as if they had breached the boundary of another world. I gasped, pulling back quickly. It's real, it's actually real, I managed to say, my breath fogging in the shop's chilly air. Dr. Marks, ever the scientist, took numerous readings and documented everything.
This is remarkable. You've discovered a portal, an actual portal. But where it leads and why Mr. Graves was so interested in it are still mysteries.
We need to find out.
Elsie stepped forward.
I think we should go through.
I knew the risks were immense, but the need for answers outweighed the fear. All right, but we'll go together, prepared as much as possible. We geared up with flashlights, ropes, and cameras. Taking a deep breath, we touched the photograph together, and this time we pushed through. The sensation was disorienting, a mix of cold and pressure. And then suddenly, we were standing in a dark, dense forest, unmistakably the one from the photograph. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and earth, and the moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy above us. We could hear distant sounds that were foreign, not belonging to our world. A few feet away, a path led deeper into the darkness. Let's find out why Graves was drawn here and hopefully find our way back, I said, taking the lead as we started down the path, our flashlights piercing the darkness ahead. As we ventured deeper into the shadowy forest, each step seemed to echo through the trees as if announcing our presence to the unseen watchers of this strange world. The path was uneven, with roots snaking across it like the tentacles of some sleeping beast. Elsie held her flashlight steady, its beam slicing through the darkness, revealing glimpses of the dense underbrush and towering ancient trees that seemed to whisper among themselves. Dr. Marks kept checking her instruments, which were behaving erratically.
The electromagnetic readings are off the charts here, and the temperature fluctuations are unlike anything I've seen.
We moved cautiously, aware that every shadow could hide secrets or dangers. After what felt like hours, but the time was difficult to gauge in this place, we came upon a clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone altar covered in moss and vines. It looked as though it had been there for centuries, perhaps millennia. Elsie approached the altar first, her curiosity overcoming her fear. Carved into the stone were symbols that none of us recognized. They glowed faintly in the moonlight, casting an eerie, pulsing light. I think this is why Graves was here, I said, joining her side. This altar might be a focal point of whatever energy this place holds. Dr. Marks set up her equipment around the altar, taking readings and recording everything.
There's a pattern to these symbols. They might be part of a ritual or a gateway.
I noticed a small, leather-bound book partially buried under the moss as we examined the altar. I pulled it free and brushed off the cover. It was remarkably well preserved. and when I opened it, the pages revealed more of the strange symbols, along with writings in a language I couldn't decipher.
This must have belonged to Graves. It may contain the answers we're looking for.
We used the book as a guide, trying to replicate the symbols and their arrangements around the altar. As we arranged stones and branches according to the patterns in the book, a low hum began to fill the air, vibrating through the ground and into our bones. Suddenly, the air before the altar rippled, and a figure stepped through. It was Graves, or at least his apparition. He looked just as he did in the photos, but translucent, his eyes filled with unspoken knowledge and a hint of sadness.
You have opened the gate that I could not. But beware, for not all that lies beyond is meant to be discovered.
Why did you come here, Graves? What were you looking for? I asked, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest.
I sought knowledge, the kind that has been forbidden and forgotten. But my search was premature. The world was not ready, nor was I. The cost was more than I anticipated, trapping me in this threshold between realms.
What can we do to help you?
Elsie's compassion overrides her fear.
Complete the ritual, but be prepared for what follows. You must close the gate after. It is not meant to remain open.
We nodded, understanding the gravity of our task. Following his directions, we completed the arrangement of symbols and recited the phrases from the book. The air grew colder and the humming louder until, with a final pulse of energy, the apparition of Graves smiled, nodding in gratitude as he dissolved into the ether. The gate before the altar closed, the glow of the symbols fading, leaving us in near darkness, the only light coming from our flashlights and the distant moon.
We did it. We should leave now before anything else happens.
We retraced our steps back through the forest, and the path was more precise now. When we reached the photograph, it served as our portal home. Stepping back through, we found ourselves in the shop, the early morning light streaming through the windows. Back in the shop, the air felt different, lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted from the room. We collapsed into chairs, exhausted and overwhelmed by what we had experienced. Dr. Marks carefully packed away her equipment, her hands slightly trembling.
We need to document everything. This was unprecedented.
Elsie and I nodded in agreement, though fatigue was etching deep lines into our faces. First, we need some rest, I suggested. We can reconvene later today and start going through our findings. As they left, I locked the shop's door behind them and walked through the silent aisles, passing the shelves filled with cameras and photos that had started it all. The shop no longer felt haunted but hallowed, as if we had exorcised a lingering spirit. I looked through my uncle's journal once more, seeking insights into how he might have dealt with the aftermath of his encounters. There, in his final entries, I found a reflection that resonated deeply. October 2nd, 1955. The shop feels different now, quieter. I wonder if my actions have settled whatever stirred from that other place or merely paused it. I have hidden the photograph and the book, safeguarding against curiosity or folly. Perhaps one day, someone brave enough will uncover them again and find this journal. To that person, I offer both warning and hope. Be wise, be wary, and above all, respect the boundaries that are not meant to be crossed. This passage struck a chord. My uncle had understood the unknown's dangers and allure just as we had tonight. I made a mental note to ensure that the photograph and the book were stored safely and accessible only to those who understood their significance. Later that day, after some much-needed sleep, Elsie, Dr. Marks, and I met again in the shop. We laid out all our findings, the photographs, the recordings, and the notes from our adventure. As we pieced together our experience, we realized that we had uncovered a family mystery and stepped into a much larger world of paranormal and metaphysical phenomena.
We should consider publishing our findings. With the proper academic framing, this could be a significant contribution to paranormal research.
Elsie and I glanced at each other. The prospect was tempting, but we knew the dangers of exposing such powerful knowledge. We'll need to be very careful about how much we reveal, I said. We don't want to invite the wrong kind of attention. Not everyone will respect the power that lies through that portal. The discussion continued for hours, and by the end, we had agreed to draft a preliminary paper focusing on the phenomena without disclosing the location or the more sensitive details of the rituals. As the days turned into weeks, the shop returned to its routine but with a new undercurrent of mystery and respect. Customers came and went, oblivious to the extraordinary events that had transpired within its walls. Occasionally, I caught myself staring at the spot where the photograph had hung, pondering the strange, dark forest and Dorian Graves's words. Life had returned to normal, but the adventure had changed us. We had looked beyond the veil and come back wiser, more aware of the thin and fragile boundaries that separate our world from others. And somewhere deep in the shadows of the shop, I knew that the path to the dark forest was still there, quietly waiting for the next curious soul brave enough to step through.